Pay very, very close attention to the following video because you will be amazed. What you are seeing right now is how a group of people, young people, from a political group in Spain are destroying and vandalizing cars in the middle of the street. They are smashing the windows, slashing the tires, and even drawing graffiti on the bodywork. I repeat, they are young people who belong to a legal political organization in Spain who are destroying private cars without anyone stopping them. But do you want to know the very worst part of it? The worst thing is that this video was uploaded by the same political organization on social media platforms. They were proud of what they had done, and their goal was to convey the following message.
More than 100,000 tourist rental cars, saturation, unsustainability, pollution, and turning the city into a tourist showcase. Youth go on the offensive.
The cars they were vandalizing were not normal cars, but rather rental cars from car rental companies that had made them available to tourists who were vacationing on the island of Mallorca. In this way, the objectives of these groups was to vandalize the tourist cars to make the rental companies suffer and to use vandalism to try and scare tourists away so they would never come back. However, why would a group of young people from Palma de Mallorca, a place that survives on tourism, want to scare off tourists? It's unlikely that their parents, their friends, or they themselves could have a job thanks to the tourists who come to the island and spend their money there. So what kind of brainless person would bite the hand that feeds them? Well, regardless of whether these young people have more or less brain power, the truth is that there are good reasons to think that tourism could be much more harmful to some countries than it may seem at first glance. For example, look at this map. This map represents the relative wealth of each European country in 2021. As you can see, the countries where tourism is more present, such as Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Greece, are also among the poorest countries. In a way, it's as if tourism is condemning these regions to poverty, and in some ways, this could make a lot of sense. If you think about it, in general, the type of jobs created by tourism are low-paying, low-skilled jobs with very little room for innovation. For instance, we're talking about waiters, bricklayers who build the hotels, and receptionists, that kind of thing. And keep in mind, it is not that working in these professions is less respectable or less dignified. But what can I say? Everything indicates that if a country wants to prosper, it needs more engineers, more scientists, and less personnel dedicated to tourism. In any case, the apparent problems that tourism have are not only in the labor field, far from it. The truth is that mass tourism could have much bigger issues than that alone.
Balearic Islands cannot guarantee drinking water supply for all islands in summer. Tourism. Pollution from cruise ships is equivalent to 15% of that produced by cars in Europe.
Tourism could not only be a worrying economic problem, but also a social and environmental problem. Think about it. For instance, the increase in housing prices caused by the pressure of tourism, gridlocked roadways, the wear and tear of natural sites, and even depletion of basic things such as drinking water. Be that as it may, and in view of all this, we should consider a few questions. Is there any truth in the idea that tourism is actually a really bad activity for a country's economy? Should tourist countries start restricting the massive influx of tourists? Or perhaps there is a lot more to this story. Well, today on VisualEconomik, we will answer all of these questions. So, let's get cracking. Let's be clear from the beginning. Tourism is not necessarily bad. Tourism employs many people, contributes to the creation of numerous companies, and indirectly promotes businesses such as handicrafts, agriculture, and the sale of local products. To give you an idea, in the tourist areas of countries like Spain and Italy, more than 30% of workers live directly from tourism. If we were to eliminate tourists from these countries overnight, a tremendous economic crisis would be unleashed. But there is more. The arrival of mass tourism in these countries, particularly between the 1960s and the 1980s, was a real rocket that boosted their economic growth. This was especially true in the case of Spain. Before the arrival of tourism, Spain was a very poor country, where more than half of the population lived on agriculture, with miserable living standards, and with a population that could barely read or write. However, with the arrival of tourism, the Spanish economy began to grow like crazy. Tourist destinations such as Benidorm, the Costa Brava, and the Balearic Islands were developed. Hotels, apartments, and restaurants were built, employing many people. What's more, the workers were very well paid by the standards of the time. This model of economic growth did not require workers to go to university, nor did it require the state or international investors to spend huge amounts of money to develop the country. No, rather, tourism was a kind of unexpected gift that multiplied the welfare of Spaniards. If Spain is a developed country today, it is largely due to the explosion of tourism. Now then, the problem of tourism, the basic debate, is not whether or not it is bad in and of itself. Really, the real problem is a different one. Can tourism continue to be a driver of economic development for these countries? That is, once you have all the tourists you can accommodate, accommodate once you have already built all the necessary hotels and restaurants? Can you really continue to depend on tourism to keep growing? Well, it turns out, visual economic community, that this is a much more serious issue. I mean, just think about it. When a country is rich and wants to become even richer, what it has to do is innovate. It has to bring better and newer products to the market, and naturally, it has to find new technologies that allow it to produce more. In short, it has to do things better and better. But if your business model is tourism, to what extent can you utilize innovation to allow you to generate more and more wealth? After all, you can't make your beaches better in order to increase the price, and you can't serve soft drinks on the terrace of a bar in a more innovative way. In a way, tourism in your country will always be much the same. It will hardly be able to generate much more money than what you may have already been making from it. Or, to put it another way, although tourism may have been a great economic driver 50 years ago, today everything indicates that it is a limited industry. But what if I told you that the problem could be even worse than that? What if I told you that tourism could be a kind of economic disease that is holding back the development of more advanced sectors in these countries? It is as if tourism were holding back science and industry itself. You don't believe me? Well, then pay attention to this.
The Dutch disease of Southern Europe.
Some time ago on this channel, we made a video talking about the Dutch disease. For those of you who are not familiar with the term, the Dutch disease is a very curious phenomenon whereby countries with more natural resources, the countries with oil, natural gas, or valuable minerals, are almost always very poor countries. Yes, this is something that may not seem to make sense. How is it possible that countries with more resources are poorer? Think, for example, of Venezuela, the country with the largest oil reserves in the world, and at the same time, one of the poorest on the planet. Or think of the countries such as Sub-Saharan Africa that have innumerable resources such as gold and diamonds, and yet are dirt poor. How is this possible? The main explanation is that the governments of these countries tend to take advantage of natural resources to become more corrupt, to obtain money illegally, and to better control the population. In addition, when a country has such a powerful resource as oil, it tends to neglect the growth of other sectors, which in the long run ends up hurting its economy. Well, something very similar happens in tourist countries. In Italy, Greece, and Spain, there is no oil, but they do have landscapes, beaches, and heritage features which are nothing less than natural resources. Natural resources that can bring in a lot of money. The question is, how can tourism corrupt politicians or harm other sectors such as industry? Well, the answer can be found in the following example.
Mayor of Marbella and 22 others arrested for urban corruption.
In the tourist areas of these countries, as is the case, for example, with Marbella in Spain, it is very easy to find cases of urban corruption, bribes and commissions in exchange for political favors that allow or expedite permits for the construction of hotels, apartments, or housing. This may seem minor, but as an example, during the years before the real estate bubble crash of 2008, this type of urban corruption stimulated the huge real estate bubble of that time even more, which caused Spain to be much harder hit by the great financial crisis than other countries. Be that as it may, we are going to switch to looking at something even more serious now.
The increase in tourist arrivals clearly positively affects employment in tourism-related sectors. However, the employment created in tourism appears to be mostly temporary in nature and is more than offset by a decrease in more stable employment in other sectors such as construction and industry.
What you have just seen are the conclusions of a study that analysed the effects on unemployment of one-off increases in tourism in Spain. What was found that although tourism created jobs in the short term in hotels and restaurants and bars, it did so at the cost of reducing employment in other sectors. In other words, tourism would not be a net job creator, but rather would be stealing workers from other industries, at least in the short term. The question is, why is this so important? And what difference does it make if people work in one sector or another? Because, as we have said previously, tourism may be a sector with very little scope for innovation and economic growth. For example, many young people may be very tempted to work in tourism and put aside their studies or professional careers in exchange for making quick money in this sector. What's more, if we look at the regions with the highest number of school dropouts in Spain, we will see that among them are the Balearic Islands, the Canary Islands, and Andalusia. These regions are precisely the most tourist-dense ones in the country. Coincidence? I don't think so. Whatever the case, in light of all this, does it mean that the tourist countries of Europe should give up on this sector? Is this the definitive proof that we should start restricting the arrival of tourists to these countries and prevent the business from developing further? Well, let's not be so hasty. The truth is that just that there are many countries with oil that are very poor, there are also countries such as Qatar or Norway that are very rich. And in a certain sense, the same thing happens with tourism. If we take a closer look at how tourism is distributed across Europe, we will see that other wealthy countries such as the United Kingdom and Germany also have quite high tourism rates. In fact, tourism in these countries is not much lower than in Italy. Similarly, US states such as New York and California are also two of the most touristy states in the country, yet they are also among the wealthiest. So no, tourism does not necessarily spell economic doom. The point is that there are countries and territories that take better advantage of tourism than others. But do you want an even more surprising example? Well, look at the case of Dubai. Dubai is one of the Arab territories that has, believe it or not, no oil. Despite this, it is much wealthier than Saudi Arabia, which is an expert in selling dinosaur juice. Well, do you know what one of Dubai's main businesses is? That's right, it's tourism. Tourism is estimated to generate more than $20 out of every $100 of Dubai's economic activity. And once again, Dubai is a very rich and very prosperous place because of it. The question is, how does it do it? Why are there territories like Dubai that depend so much on tourism and yet are rich, prosperous, and still innovative? Well, let's take a look.
All is not lost.
There is one very important thing to keep in mind. Just as all industries are not equal, for example, Germany's industrial sector is much more advanced and profitable than China's, not all types of tourism are identical either. For example, New York, London, and Dubai itself are very touristy places, but the important thing is that the type of tourist they attract typically spends a lot of money. That is, they shop in luxury stores, they visit museums, they attend the theater, or go to concerts. In short, it is a tourist that boosts the local economy. Meanwhile, in the case of tourism in southern Europe, and with a few exceptions, the tourist tends to be known as the sun and beach tourist, a tourist who pays for accommodation, possibly self-catering, who looks for bargains and spends the day in natural settings such as beaches or seeing public monuments. Almost all of this is free of charge. In a way, this tourist does not spend a lot of money in the local economy. I mean, obviously, there are plenty of exceptions, but please understand the generalization here. The point is that in places where tourists spend money, there is more room for innovation. For example, you can create better and better theater shows or attract higher quality exhibitions that encourage tourists to spend even more money. Yet, in sun and beach tourism, this seems more difficult. Again, it is not possible to make better beaches than those that already exist. However, just because it is more difficult does not mean that it is impossible. For instance, can you tell me two of the countries with the most Michelin stars in the world? Well, we could indeed highlight Spain and Italy. Lately, these countries have been developing haute cuisine businesses, very innovative and scientific cuisine that we could practically qualify as high engineering. Going to these restaurants can easily cost between 300 and 500 euros per diner. And the interesting thing is that there are many people around the world with a lot of money who'll be willing to visit these countries just to go to these restaurants. And naturally, these same people will also spend more money in hotels, will spend more on cultural services, and surely boost the local economy more than the typical sun and beach tourists. In other words, the capacity to innovate and grow economically through tourism does exist. It might be luxury restaurants or the development of recreational activities such as scuba diving or any other type of initiatives that will add value and attract tourists willing to spend more money. So what does it take to make this happen, you might ask? How do you attract tourists with better profiles who will spend more money and who will boost the local economy? Two factors are very important here. The first is that countries in question provide facilities for entrepreneurship, studies, and the development of new ideas. In other words, if we want luxury restaurants or innovative services for tourists, what we need to do is to allow young people to be trained under the right conditions, and once they have been trained, to give them the resources to set up their projects or tourism companies. And the second factor is to control the problems associated with overcrowding. In many cases, more tourism does not mean better tourism. Mass tourism can lead to overcrowded roads, which in turn can damage other local industries. It can also mean a lack of supplies such as drinking water, and it can even cause tourist sites to lose their charm. If you don't believe me, take a look at this picture. If a sun and beach tourist country like all those in southern Europe wants to attract tourists with money, overcrowding such as you see in this image is likely to attract an unprofitable type of tourism. At the end of the day, the tourist with money will probably prefer to travel towards more exotic places with fewer crowds. Let's just say a comparison would be nightclubs. In crowded nightclubs, people with money tend to opt for reserved space. cases. The solution to this could perhaps involve the application of tourist taxes, charging for access to certain natural environments, which would also serve to bring in more money, or perhaps a geographic diversification of tourist sites. Although realistically, if we want to discuss these solutions, we would need to make a whole other video. In any case, the conclusion of this video is that tourism as a concept does not necessarily have to be bad, nor does it have to be associated with a lower level of economic development. We have already seen this in cases such as the United Kingdom and New York. Perhaps the important thing is to provide facilities for this industry to evolve and to promote tourism specialization towards more innovative and higher value added services. And well, in reality, perhaps the problem of countries like Spain, Greece and Italy lies not really in tourism, but in their government, their institutions, and the enormous tax and regulatory barriers that hold back investment and innovation in tourism, as well as in many other sectors. Be that as it may, now it's over to all of you. Do you think that tourism is a disease for economic development? Do you think that the problem of southern European countries is tourism, or is it their institutions? Is low value added tourism the cause or the consequence of the mediocre economy of these countries? You can leave me your answer in the comments below. And as always, don't forget that here on VisualEconomik, we release new videos every week. Subscribe to this channel and hit the little bell button down there so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like this video, like it. All the best, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.